Hello and welcome to another instalment of Unmanned Uncovered. I'm your host, Bryn Lucas. This podcast is brought to you by Consortic, here to help you take your drone program to new heights. On the podcast this week, I have two esteemed guests. From Consortic, I have John Gore, their Digital Innovation Manager for Europe, Middle East and Asia. And from Procure Plus, I have their lead for supply chain development. That's Thomas Hague. Gents, thank you very much for joining me on this episode of the podcast. First, let's find out a little bit about you. John, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks, Bryn. Yeah, my name is John. I work for Consortic and I'm the Digital Innovation Manager. I've been with Consortic for 5 years now. We are a company that help organisations put drones and autonomous technologies in the sky and into practice safely and efficiently.
Lovely. That's what you hope anyway, right?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. That's the plan.
That's the plan, that's the dream, that's the goal. And Thomas, your role as the lead for supply chain development at Procure Plus, that sounds like quite a grandiose title. So talk us through that one. Welcome to the podcast, by the way.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So Procure Plus is a social housing consortia. So we deal with all the procurement for social housing providers across the country. I guess the title, supply chain development, is really around looking at new things in the market and how they can be of use to our social housing clients.
For those of us who don't know, what is procurement?
Procurement's fundamentally buying things, and then particularly in the public sector, it has a lot more meaning because you are regulated by the public procurement regulations. So it's not quite as simple as just popping down to shop and getting whatever you want. It needs to be done in a compliant way. That effectively means it needs to be transparent so that people can see that you're tendering, and then people can bid in with the right qualifications, and the work can be handled in a transparent way.
Okay, so we're talking about procurement of services and suppliers for social housing. What sort of buildings are we talking about here, and how do drones come into it all?
Our social housing landlords own a variety of stock, and drones are really useful for high rise, and they have application for other types of property as well, for example, roof inspection.
Drones and UAS are used, as we know, across multiple industries now. What I love about doing this podcast and talking to people like yourself, Thomas, and you, John, is that I get to find out all the weird and wonderful things that drones are getting used in. And we know about inspection services, getting a quick look at a roof of a building and things like that. But digital twins are something that's really grown up, I think, over the last number of years. John, when it comes to Consortic and your point of view, digital twins are one aspect of what you do, but how do you link up with someone like Thomas at Procure Plus?
So the reason that we're connected with Procure Plus is because they put together a framework for suppliers such as Consortic who have innovative solutions to various problems to make it easy to connect to Procure Plus's clients, which are, of course, the landlords. So for us, it's important to be connected to organisations like Procure Plus because they can act as that conduit and they can really publicise these innovative approaches to the traditional problems.
From your point of view then, Thomas, you have to have a full understanding of really everything that landlords, freeholders are going to want when it comes to their building, the maintenance of it, every aspect really. For you going forwards, you want new technologies, you want something to be simplified and made easier, is that right?
Yeah, so I'd say a key part of our role and my role is understanding what landlords want and then marrying that up against what the market can provide. And often in this example, it's not necessarily quite so straightforward as, buying a new kitchen, which is relatively easy to get. So as John was talking about, that engagement and talking and understanding what suppliers can do, and then basing that on our understanding of what clients need or may need in the future, actually, because a lot of the stuff that John and I have talked about, landlords are only just grasping that this would be useful for them.
Okay, so it's a way of being able to open a conversation up to say to people, look, there's one way things have been done in the past. It's not necessarily the best way. There are alternatives. We're in 2021 now. Let's see what they have to offer.
It's a little bit of that, for example, roof surveys, we've been doing that for a long time. But in the case of the Grenfell disaster, it actually opened up a whole new area that we hadn't really thought about before and had to come up with solutions to try and tackle the issues that were raised.
Yeah. And as Thomas just mentioned, the Grenfell disaster, it's worth linking that into this conversation. So a horrible time, 14th of June 2017, when I'm sure everyone who is listening to this knows fully well what the Grenfell disaster was, but 72 people sadly lost their lives after an inferno, really, at a tower block in West London. There's a lot of blame thrown around to the different emergency services, unfairly. It's a debate that still is rolling on today, but from that disaster, Dame Judith Hackett was asked to commission a report, really, to come up with ways to prevent this from happening again. And her report really centered around HRRBs. These are buildings of 10 stories or more, higher risk residential buildings. And it was for the owners of these buildings, whether it's councils or whatever, to make sure they have everything in place to prevent a disaster like Grenfell ever happening again.
Yeah, the focus has been on high-rise residential buildings because they present quite a serious amount of risk, and it's clear that we haven't understood our buildings perhaps as well as we should have.
Now, one of the areas that was identified in the Hackett report was where information is stored, and the fact that at that point there was information stored in multiple places. And the Hackett report really said that there should be one point, that all this information is in one place, so it's much easier to find and identify. John, from Consortic's point of view, did you have a solution ready to go? This idea of maybe a digital twin that could have all the information in one place? Or was it the Grenfell disaster that really was the stimulus?
It's definitely been an organic process, really. We've always been drone-led as a business, and we've understood how to access innovative solutions using drones. And it's obvious whenever you think of a high-rise building, you think of how much easier and more efficiently a drone can provide you information about that building than traditional methods such as the cradles that descend down the building, or scaffolding, which is of course intrusive and expensive. So it provided an obvious solution. In the process of working with that and understanding a lot more the problems that the landlords were facing, how they were trying to solve this solution, it became apparent to us that there must be a better way around the information management. And that then brought in our 3D environment, understanding of how to build 3D models and turning that into interior 3D capture as well, which, the term used, digital twin, is absolutely accurate. When you combine those things together, you're effectively creating a digital replica of the landlord's stock. And that enables them then to have better information about that building in what's commonly coined the golden thread of information.
Thomas, what was the world like, the picture like, before these digital twins could be created? Talk me through the process of what you had access to, how easy it was to get access to the bits of information you needed, and where they were located.
Yeah, so I think for the last 10, 15 years, a lot of information has been available, but it's been very much in silos, or it's been handed over at occupation and then sort of put in a drawer to gather dust. And what John was talking about is a much more integrated and continuous view and management of building information, and not necessarily looking at things in isolation. So, for example, previously our view of fire risk assessments, FRAs, was typically around the internals of buildings. And now it's obvious that we need to take into account also the external condition and cladding of the buildings as well.
And so previously you would have access to all these bits of information of what cladding was on a building, where the fire doors were located in the building, where the fire hydrants were in the building, the emergency stairways, the number of properties, apartments within each floor of each building, etc., etc. But they might not have been in one easily accessible place.
Yeah, they were very much spread across probably different teams and different departments, and people would take responsibility for different areas.
And this is something that the Hackett report really picked up on, wasn't it? That actually having all this information out there is a brilliant thing. But if it's not in one place, if it's not easily accessible in one place, then it's kind of useless. You need to be able to bring it all together because it makes much more sense.
Yeah, it's a few things there. There's information, and then there's also that expertise in terms of what you do with the information and how you manage it. So in my mind, it brings together a few things, but at the heart of that is if you haven't got the information there to understand your building, it's going to be really difficult to manage your assets.
Yeah. And so, John, talk me through how you really got involved, because being able to produce a digital twin is one thing, being able to identify the need is also another thing, but then going to someone like Thomas and saying, look, this problem is a big problem and it's something that we can help out with. How did Consortic get to that point, and how did your conversation, and maybe I'll come to you after, Thomas, but how did your conversation with Thomas go?
We were very fortunate to have been invited along to a working group that Thomas leads up in Greater Manchester that brings together the interested parties to talk about technical solutions to the problems that they're facing. You know, collectively, they're all facing the same problem. So how can we bring our minds together and solve that? And I was invited to do a demonstration just around drones and what we do with drones and the novel value of them, why they're so cool. And on the back of that conversation, I had a couple of chats with various landlords, various risk managers that all said, this is all great, but we can't see what it is, how this would work for us. And that was the light bulb moment that I needed. Came back to the team here at Consortic and we got our heads together and thought, there's a better way of solving this problem. And it's all about efficiency and speed. Whenever you think about drones, there is a safety factor. It does reduce people having to be up high on scaffolding or in cradles. But of course, it's about efficiency and speed. And it was bringing those technologies together in a way that people understood without having to go out and gain that expertise themselves. They kind of don't care what happens in the middle. They love the idea and they love the output, just do the bit in the middle. And that's where, we were able to quickly put this proof of concept together, one of the properties in Manchester, and start looking at how we can turn, again, what is a concept into something that's meaningful. It transcends just being pretty and impressive. It has to be useful. And that's what, we've really, really focused on here is nobody wants to pay a lot of money for lots of models of their buildings that can live in a 3D environment. They want something they can use day to day. And that's what we've really focused on.
And so, Thomas, you obviously saw this demonstration, or you saw the idea presented to you. Presumably from that point there, it was a no-brainer. You thought, okay, well, they can do it. Let's give them the chance to prove they can do it and then see the advantages from it.
Yeah, I've thought for a while drones can offer a number of solutions to housing providers. As John's talked about, there's an efficiency, there is a speed. Health and safety is really important in terms of working at height, but it was a solution to help landlords understand their buildings better, I think, and it goes on from that as well. So it's not just about taking pictures, close-up pictures of your cladding condition. What's really quite useful, I think, for landlords is taking all these pictures and then developing a 3D model. I'm a big believer in, pictures say 1,000 words, so you can have all your drawings you want, but I personally find a 3D model a really helpful way to understand buildings, and particularly if it's based on pictures, then you can see the cracks and you can see where things need improving.
So it came about really from Consortic's point of view. This is something you were doing previously anyway within different industries. Digital twins aren't really completely new. They're used across many different industries, but it's a kind of a new use case really. And from your point of view, Thomas, from this horrific time, this Grenfell disaster, and we're not going to underplay this in any way at all. It was absolutely devastating, horrific event that should never happen again. But from that and from the report, it kind of opened up the industry's eyes and forced the industry to create a solution to a problem that, by the sound of it, was there for quite some time.
Yeah, and it's surprising for me. My background's in the automotive industry, and so the automotive industry, for as long as I was working there, all the drawings were digital. We always had 3D models. I think housing and construction has lagged behind. So even though we've been talking about BIM for a long time, we're not using digital models to manage our building. The ideal way would be a building would get built, we'd have all the digital plans, they get handed over, as just like CDM talks about, and we'd be using those. But unfortunately, data gets lost, or we're talking about older buildings, and we haven't had that those models to use. So stuff like drones has played a really important part in providing that.
Yeah, and it does sound like it's moved the industry on a fair bit. So from this disaster, we now have a kind of a new solution, and it's a really nice solution that you can have in one place all this information that's accessed very, very simply and easily. How's it changed the landscape for landlords?
I think what it provides, it's another tool in your toolkit to help you manage your assets, your buildings. So as well as all the technical detail that you'll need to have and all the surveys, having that a digital model is just something that helps you do your job better as an asset manager or as a building safety manager.
Get the data that's most important to you and your organisation with unmanned data services from Consortic. From utility inspections to construction project surveys, our remote pilots will utilise the latest drone technology to give you the most precise and accurate information safely, quickly, and within your budget. Let us do the work for you. Schedule a consultation now at consortic.com. How's this technology changing, John? Has it moved on since the creation of this digital twin? Is it consistently and continuously evolving?
I think one of the key areas of change has been around, I hate to throw AI around like everyone does, but the artificial intelligence involved with creation of these 3D models has taken something that was traditionally painstakingly slow to create, and it makes it a lot simpler. There are a number of online tools that you can use now where you can dump thousands upon thousands of pictures and it will turn it into a compelling 3D model. Creating of the 3D model is not really where our expertise lies. It's the adoption of all of the technologies and bringing that all together. But the use of that software technology that makes that process a lot simpler is where we're then able to leverage, the efficiency gain, because rather than having to deal with traditional methods, maybe get a surveyor in to take all of the measurements to create the floor plans that Thomas talks about. Well, now we can go in and we can achieve that in a day, to the same degree of accuracy, perhaps even better, because we're using automated technologies, such as the drone, which, geotagged photos is how that works. And, we've got the 3D laser scanners that piece these models together in real time for us. And that then creates a degree of accuracy that is usable for everyone, really.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's taking quite a lot of different aspects together to create what is a very, very complex point cloud digital twin all in one place. What areas are we covering here to create the models you're able to make?
Well, you're absolutely right when you say about point clouds, because effectively that's what we're doing. And we're using two different technologies to create a common point cloud. And those technologies are what's called photogrammetry. So it's where you use common points on multiple images to create effectively a colored dot in space. And that is one point in a point cloud. And then on the interior scan, we use what's known as terrestrial LiDAR scanners. And it does exactly the same thing. It will send a beam of light off, measure how far that is, what color was it when it came back, and it does that millions upon millions of times per second to create this dense point cloud. The process beyond that then is how do we make that meaningful? Because what you get is a really cool model. Thomas rightly points out that when you've got a 3D model, it helps you visualize things a lot better. But we want to go one step beyond that. We want to take it beyond just it being visual. It needs to be useful and become the centralization of the asset management. And that's when we've got a number of processes, a number of different outputs, but we're talking then about BIM, which is building information modeling, and turning those point clouds into a BIM model that allows people to use it for asset management. So you have a 3D representation of a door. Well, actually you can tag all of your asset information against that door: who manufactured it, when was it installed, when was it last surveyed. And that's where then that becomes really information, and that golden thread of information that the Hackett report talks about.
The golden thread is it's a big buzzword. It's a really kind of, it's integral to the whole conversation, really. Thomas, briefly, as best you can you explain this golden thread?
Yes, so the golden thread is that linking of information through the life of buildings. So as an example, you've got REBA stages of construction, so that there are various recognised times and activities that take place when you're building and it's in use. It's looking at those bits of information that you use through all those stages are really useful, and it's keeping that continuation of information rather than perhaps the traditional walled approach where you do your bit of the job and then you just hand it over to the next one over a fence, and they kind of take what they can from it. It's making building information much more living.
Yeah, and it seems like that if you can have one method, one universal method across the board that anybody can then go and review and update and continually capture, then presumably when it comes to 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years time, in one place you have this huge amount of information that you can completely and continually draw upon when it comes to making updates to your properties, to any aspect of that building as well.
I think John's example was really good when he talked about fire doors, actually. So the idea that you know what fire doors are installed, where they're installed, the condition they're installed, and then you have the ability to maintain that really important part of your building. I thought that was a really nice example of where the golden thread will come in hand, be really useful for landlords. To help them to actively manage and maintain and keep their property as good as the day it was built.
Yeah, it seems to me like there's a really good focus for the future on this one here, and something that if everyone starts to utilize it, it just makes more sense for across the board when it comes to any building, no matter how big, but particularly these higher risk buildings as well. John, where can this go? How much further, how much better can it be? Or is it a case of it's reached a ceiling now with what it can do, but it can just keep getting better in how it looks?
No, I think we're only at the beginning here. When you look at all of the buildings that are still standing in, from the 1950s through 1970s boom of high-rise construction, we have, I'd hate to say archaic, because I'm sure that there's a lot of planning and a lot of management by design went into these buildings, but it's dated now, and we have the opportunity to very quickly and easily go back through all of those buildings and create this digital twin, this, effectively the very beginning of the strand of the golden thread of information. Moving forward into the future, building standards will evolve to mandate that all buildings that are constructed will have to be created in conjunction with a digital twin. And perhaps the most high profile digital twin we can talk about at the moment is the HS2 rail line, which is being constructed entirely in a digital environment and then replicated in the real environment. So that's a key change there, where it's digital first, real second. And I think it can, as technologies improve, so as sensors get better and they get lighter, and of course in the drone world we talk endlessly about beyond visual line of sight operations. Once we've got the point where the drones can operate without needing someone to be at the controls and it still be safe, then that information doesn't become a snapshot in time. That becomes a real-time update. Every time the drone passes the building, it can recapture that data, plug it back in. So we're really very much at the start of the digital twin journey, if you want to call it that. So yeah, lots of development to come.
And what do you think, Thomas?
I think, John answered very well in terms of what drones can do. What I see in the future that we're not utilising is if we can move also from the visual elements of light to perhaps infrared. So as we try to decarbonise our buildings, if we can see where there's heat loss using IR cameras instead of visual, I think that's a really fantastic tool to understand the as-built performance of our buildings. Taking again what John said, lots of construction does happen digitally now, but there's a real performance gap between that digital design and the as-built performance. And so things like IR cameras that drones can carry allow you to measure that.
Yeah, it's just incredible, isn't it, to see how one form of an industry, so UAS drones, can really impact on one other industry in such a way that clearly has proven benefits for all. Because from Consortic's point of view, you're continually developing and getting business, which is crucially what you're here for. And from Thomas's point of view, it means that when he comes to understand, or when his landlords come to understand what they need to do to their building, they can see it and it's in real time, which I think, Thomas, is probably a lot easier when going to a landlord and getting them to understand, or them understanding what they need. If they can see that their building is leaking heat through every orifice, and then they can see that it can be fixed quite simply, and then the next time it's scanned, the problem's gone away. It's a nice sort of illustration, a visual illustration of what can be achieved.
Yeah, I think that the challenge is often that beginning measuring the performance and understanding where your problems are. So tools like drones, I think, could be really helpful in that area.
That's certainly in our immediate development plan. We focused initially on what's the immediate use case and creating these digital twins. But the drones that we fly with, the drone that we used to capture this building, it was equipped with a thermal camera at the time. Our developments then will involve the 3D model making of thermal imagery overlaid on top of these buildings. So yeah, that's a very compelling development step that's effectively right there right now.
Thomas, do you think that the industry that you're in would have changed so much had there not have been that awful incident at Grenfell?
I'd say that social landlords in general, all the ones I've dealt with, have always cared a lot about the residents and their buildings. For me, Grenfell was a wake-up call to all high-rise buildings. There's a number of problems, as you talked about, Bryn, at the beginning, but certainly one of them was really understanding what's on the outside of our buildings and making sure that what is on the outside of our buildings is safe. And that's where I think drones, I see a real use in terms of understanding our cladding, because often we don't fully understand what's on the outside of our buildings, or we don't understand the condition that the cladding's in.
Yeah, absolutely. From both of your points of view then, the future looks rosy and it looks like it's got quite a lot of technological advances on their way. John, if you could pick out one or two things that you think will advance this whole aspect of the industry, what do you think it would be?
I think it will be the kind of cultural change, the cultural shift towards digital first, and the record keeping of assets living in a digital environment and attached to a 3D object. I think that will be the biggest advancement.
And Thomas, maybe an unfair question really, given your role doesn't really change, might alter slightly, but what do you think this can do for the procurement world?
Well, it's not so much what it can do for the procurement world, because the procurement world is governed by what customers want. So in terms of our customers, the social landlords, what it can do for social landlords, I think, is provide a different perspective on their buildings that they haven't had before. And I think, as John alluded to earlier, the ability to refresh that much more frequently than perhaps we've done before offers some real advantages in terms of that asset management.
Gents, we've covered off so much in half an hour, really, from the problem, a solution, and how it's moving forward. John, is there anything that you'd like to add that you feel we've missed, or that would go some way to explaining anything further?
No, I think we've talked fairly extensively about the solution that's available there. I think that the kind of key point for us to get across is that we are familiar with dealing with organisations from large to small. So if you're an organisation that's you have a very small team and you have very limited resource, then there is a solution to this for you. And it doesn't involve investment in high-end software packages. It can all be hosted and managed. And similarly, if you're a large portfolio holder and you have existing systems, we're very familiar with integrating with that.
Thomas, what's it been like for you working with John and the team from Consortic?
It's been really good. I think we've actually worked incredibly well together, that we both bring different elements to the discussion, and it's great for me to talk about problems and potential ideas, and it's great for Consortic and John to actually make solutions happen, and it's been a collaborative and positive relationship so far, and it's opened my eyes as well. It's quite exciting to bring innovative products to an area that typically, as landlords, we're quite slow in using new tools and techniques. So it's been very exciting.
Gents, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much for spending time with me and talking us through this entire process. Thomas, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been really enjoyable.
And John, thank you as well.
Thanks, Bryn. Yeah, it's been good fun.
So there you have it, how drones and UAS can help landlords achieve more than just a digital twin. It'll be interesting to see how drones and landlords can work together in the future. My thanks go to John Gore from Consortic and Thomas Hague from Procure Plus. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can find more episodes via your usual podcast provider or just head to consortic.com. I've been your host, Bryn Lucas. Thanks for listening.